It is the year 332 BC. You are standing on a beach in Phoenicia, staring at a city that cannot be taken. Tyre, an island fortress half a mile out at sea, ringed by stone walls that rise 150 feet above the waves. No bridge, no fleet, no way in. And yet, within 7 months, a 23-year-old king will walk through those walls. Not because of his sword, because of something no one ever thinks of as a weapon. Trees. This is the story of the secret green corridors that fueled Alexander the Great's siege engines. And once you see them, you will never look at a map of his empire the same way again. To understand it, you have to go back before Alexander, back to his father, Philip, and a kingdom the rest of Greece looked down on. Macedonia, a rough, mountainous land in the north. But those mountains held something the sophisticated cities of the south had almost run out of: forests. Slopes of towering silver fir, oak, mountain pine, some of the finest shipbuilding timber in the entire Mediterranean world. Athens knew it. For generations, the Athenians bought Macedonian timber to build their war fleets. And Macedonian kings grew rich signing treaties over trees, the way modern nations sign deals over oil. Timber was the oil of the ancient world, and Philip was sitting on one of its richest reserves. So he spent it. He hired the finest military engineers in Greece, men like Polyidus of Thessaly, and asked them a simple question. Could a machine beat a wall? By the time Philip died, the answer was taking shape, and his son inherited more than a kingdom. He inherited the engineers, the workshops, and the idea. Because here is the problem every conqueror before Alexander had faced. Siege engines are enormous. A great siege tower could stand as tall as a 10-story building. A battering ram needed a beam the length of several buses. You cannot drag that across 1,000 miles of mountains. So Alexander's army did something quietly brilliant. It carried only the parts that could not be found just anywhere: the iron fittings, the ropes and precious torsion springs, and above all, the engineers who knew the designs. The heavy timber, the bones of every machine, they would cut fresh wherever the next siege happened to be. Which means Alexander's path across the world had a hidden requirement. Wherever he planned to break a city, there had to be a forest within reach. Look at his route with that in mind, and a secret map appears. A chain of forests running from Macedonia to the edge of India. Green corridors feeding the war machine. The system got its first great test in 334 BC at Halicarnassus, a fortress city on the coast of modern Turkey. Alexander's towers rolled up to walls the defenders believed were safe. Rams swung, and stone that had stood for generations began to crack. The city was taken, and engineers like Diades, a pupil of old Polyidus, started refining their notes. The machines worked. Now they just needed wood, everywhere they went. 2 years later, they reached the city that could not be taken. Tyre sat on its island behind those 150-foot walls, and its people sent Alexander a polite message. Worship our god at the old temple on the mainland. Just do not come to the island. Alexander's answer was one of the most audacious engineering projects of the ancient world. If he could not sail to the island, he would move the land itself. He would build a bridge of earth and stone, half a mile long across the open sea. For the stone, his men tore apart the old abandoned city on the mainland and tipped its ruins into the water. But a causeway needs a skeleton. Piles driven into the seabed, timber frames to hold the rubble, cranes, rams, and towers to protect the workers. It needs wood, mountains of it. And rising just inland, there they were, the slopes of Mount Lebanon, dark with cedar. The same forests that had built the temples of Egypt and the palaces of Babylon. Ancient writers tell us plainly, the cedars came down from Lebanon for the engines and the causeway. It was so vital that it turned bloody. When mountain tribesmen ambushed the Macedonian woodcutting parties and killed dozens of axemen, Alexander led a punitive expedition into the mountains himself. Stop and think about how strange that is. In the middle of the greatest siege of his life, the king rode away from the battlefield to protect trees. On the finished causeway, his engineers raised 2 colossal siege towers, sheathed in rawhide against fire arrows. Later engineering manuals credited towers like these with the height of a 15-story building. 7 months after the first stone hit the water, Tyre fell. The city that could not be taken was taken by cedar and fir. And if you doubt the wood mattered that much, the very next siege settles it. Gaza, a fortress on a hill at the edge of the desert, and around it, sand. No forests, not one within reach. So the engines were taken apart, loaded onto ships at Tyre, and sailed down the coast to be rebuilt piece by piece outside Gaza's walls. When the forest could not come to the siege brought its forest with it. This was logistics, planned like water, like grain, like gold. Zoom out now and trace the whole route. Watch the corridors light up. The fir forests of Macedonia, where it began. The timber slopes of Mount Ida near ancient Troy. The pine-covered Taurus Mountains above the Cilician coast. The cedars of Lebanon feeding the siege of Tyre. And when the army marched east into the treeless plains of Mesopotamia and the deserts of Persia, notice what happens. The great sieges almost stop. City after city opened its gates or fell to speed and daring instead of towers. The war machine slept, waiting for the next forest. It woke up at the edge of India. In the foothills of the Himalayas, the army found forests again. Deodar cedar, pine, fir. Strabo tells us the mountains supplied timber in abundance. But this time, the timber did not just build siege engines, it built a navy. Whole hillsides were felled and floated down to the rivers of the Punjab. By some ancient counts, the fleet that carried Alexander's army down the Indus grew to nearly 2,000 vessels, an armada born from a mountain forest. So who really fueled these machines? Not just the king on the coins. The axemen, who felled 100-foot firs. The sawyers, who ripped trunks into beams. The ox teams that hauled them down mountain tracks. And the engineers, who could turn a forest into a tower in weeks. One of them, Diades, was remembered by later Greek writers with a title most generals would envy. The man who took Tyre with Alexander. Not the man who fought at Tyre, the man who took it. The ancient world knew exactly who its most dangerous minds were. There is a quiet postscript to all this, written into the land itself. The cedars of Lebanon once covered the mountains like a vast green robe. Egypt logged them. Assyria logged them. Babylon, Alexander, Rome. Today, only scattered groves of the old giants remain. Some are protected behind fences, like relics in a museum. One grove is called simply the Cedars of God. We remember Alexander's story as bronze and glory, phalanxes and famous battles. But underneath, it ran something quieter, a supply line of living things, forests that marched to war and never marched home. Every empire has a resource like that, silent, unglamorous, decisive. Rome had its grain. The British Empire had its coal. We have our own. Alexander's was green. So the next time you see a map of his conquests, all those bold arrows striking east, look closer. Between the lines, faint as the rings in old wood, run the corridors that made it all possible.